Hello, and welcome to Property Matters, a program all about matters of property designed to be of interest to anyone who has an interest in property. And Property Matters is supported by Fairview International and also, of course, Town and Country Property Auctions London. We love it when you get involved in the show. We love your comments. We've got a really interesting show with a very interesting topic that we're discussing in specific terms today. So we'd love to hear your comments in the comments section below on our video today. And don't forget to like the page or subscribe to wherever you're viewing us so you get notifications of when we go live each time. We have an email address if you'd love to get in touch, propertymatterstv@gmail.com. And joining us as always for Property Matters, Joe Joshi. And Joe, we've already been wished a very happy Father's Day from Agam. So happy Father's Day to all concerned. There's Agam getting in touch with us today. And as you can see on the screen, Joe, we have a guest. Would you like to introduce our guest to us?
Yes, good morning, everybody, and good morning to all the, as we call it, unsung heroes, the fathers out there doing their bit. And here we are on a Sunday morning doing our bit, of course, to make sure that we do everything we can for our children and our families. So have a great Father's Day to everybody, and thanks again to sending that lovely message. Agam's a friend of mine. We have a few sherbets on a Friday every so often. A few quiet ones, Paul. You know, nothing too
Obviously.
loud. And a few extra vodkas. I want to also, and unfortunately, the name Agam is there. Agam Jain is with us today. Agam is the CEO of Vector Capital, and you've often heard me on our program looking for different ways of people to sort of either invest or look at another way of marketing, developing their own portfolios. I've always felt that there's as they call it, the grey hair brigade, who sometimes don't particularly want to get involved in leaky taps, and at their time want to enjoy themselves. And I just felt that this was a great opportunity to bring on Agam. Agam Jain, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. And we're looking forward to a very exciting program with you and learning more about you and Vector Capital.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, Agam, if I could just ask you, you're the CEO of Vector Capital, and you're here to talk about co-funding. So it's a subject that I certainly don't know a great deal about. I suspect many of our viewers won't know about. So could you just give us a top line of what Vector Capital is and what co-funding is all about?
Okay, so Vector Capital, and good morning, everybody. Vector Capital is a bridging lender, also providing commercial mortgages and finance for land and property development. So we've been around for 20 years, and we're quoted on the London Stock Exchange. So the types of finances that we do are the ones that the high street banks, aren't really interested in. So people come to us, they do their project, and then they go ahead and then refinance a couple of years down the line with a normal high street lender. So co-funding then, it's been around for some time, but it's been very, very sort of, I would say, a bit risky, because if you're going to go and do it with another friend of yours, or there's risks involved because you might not have the full security. So what the co-funding schemes that we're bringing up, and which I'll discuss today, is a way for property investors to have a share in the game and have full security. So we'll develop that conversation during the time today.
Indeed, and thank you for just giving us that explanation. Let's just catch up on the news as we like to do, and very much. Joe and I have been joking over this last few weeks, because obviously with the frenzy towards the stamp duty situation at the end of this month, we've very much had kind of like a stamp duty corner in this show, to be honest with you. We've got 10 days to go, 254 hours because we're counting it down, 15,240 minutes, or just over 914,000 seconds to go until the end. That was at 10 o'clock this morning. And we're at a crisis point, not least the fact because it's not just the 30th, which is the date where obviously the benefit finishes, but of course to get the funding, the banks have said you have to have the certificate of ownership in place by tomorrow, in some cases, or at latest Wednesday. So for some people, the next 2 or 3 days are going to be absolutely critical. But of course, many of the people are struggling as it's now official that the stamp duty saving has been actually overcome by the increase in the prices. So we're at a record high in the market now. We're at 234,000 for the average property in the UK, and that outstrips the saving in many areas of the country. And of course, despite the launch of the government's guarantee scheme, owning a home is now further out of reach for some people due to the rapid rise in the prices. So it just seems like, or it feels like, the government's got it wrong for first-time buyers, Joe.
To be honest with you, Paul, I think no matter what they do or whatever happens, it's always going to be wrong. But here is a government that actually threw loads at the property market throughout the last 18 months, over the pandemic. Reduced supporting 95% mortgages, and of course reducing the stamp duty or no stamp duty. But it's a victim of its own success, because here we are in a situation where the government set some goals for people to want to do it. We've all jumped on the bandwagon. And of course, the great decider in this is the supply and the demand. And of course, the demand has now outstripped the supply of certain properties in the areas they want to be in. And because that happens, house prices have been shooting up. So, it's a win-win situation for the government, because apart from having the reduction in the stamp duty, they've actually ended up having house prices shooting up anyway. So people that want to buy have kind of lost out. But at the same time, they've been motivated to get on, because this government wants to have a generation of buy as opposed to generation of rent going forward. And I think we, as buyers and sellers ourselves, have actually been the victim of our own success, because we want to go out and buy. And remember one thing, of course, every person's ideal dream in the United Kingdom is always to own their own home. And when an opportunity has been thrown at them, they take it. But because of the crisis throughout the last 18 months, the government has, set out a scheme to build our way out, or sell in property. And it's one of the only areas that, people have had time to stop and think, well, this is what I want to do. This is the time for me to make changes. And those changes have been very fruitful. So I think I hear what you're saying in terms of, have they got it wrong? The question is, when will they get it right? For 40 years, I've been selling houses, and every successive government has been trying to get it right. We're always short of houses, so we continue to build. And when the first-time buyer has got the opportunity, sometimes they haven't got the finances to get on that step, the first run of the ladder. So, of course, Bank of Mum and Dad have always been the way that's worked out. And that's not a bad way to look at it, because at the end of the day, if they don't spend it on them whilst they can, they're not going to be able to, they're only going to give it to the tax man anyway. So, it's a win-win, really.
Mm. It's an interesting fact, Agam, that one of the estate agents, Keller Williams, points out that in the last year, since the stamp duty holiday was announced, assuming a 15% deposit, that's meant that £11,000 as each first-time buyer has had to find an additional £11,000 to fund their deposit as a result of all the house prices. And yet, very often, the stamp duty holiday discount doesn't even cover that. So it does seem that generation rent will be here to stay and not generation buy.
You see, my take on this is that in hindsight now, the government, even if they didn't offer this stamp duty saving, would the prices still have gone up? And I think they would have. So it's probably a concession, if I'm looking at it from Rishi Sunak's side, that he didn't really need to make. Having looked at it from the buyer's side, all right, it saved him a few pennies. But like you said, in terms of the price increase of the houses, how much savings has he really made? None, really, isn't it? Because he's in fact paying more, because the rise in prices has exceeded the saving. But hey ho, it was something that we thought would help encourage the property market when the Corona crisis came along. We all had this fear that is this going to kill the property market? In hindsight, it didn't, but it was a necessary tool at that time, and it's probably right now that at the end of this month it should finish.
Absolutely. Well, of course, it tapers down at the end of the month till September. And if you're in the southwest or the southeast, or if you have the misfortune, I use the word advisory, to live in Hammersmith or Fulham. I'm sure it's lovely there, but the prices have been truly rocketing to the highest levels compared to other parts of the country. So those are the areas where we've seen the biggest panic buying, if you want to call it that. But do you think there's going to be, and this is kind of moving into our next question, do you think there'll be a natural correction over this next 6 months or so when things start to calm down? Joe?
There's always a natural correction, and it's interesting, Paul. This week alone, there's been a mixed review and a mixed view. Some people say house prices will fall at the end of June because obviously all of a sudden this stamp duty business has gone away and this frenzy of high prices. So subsequently, house prices will start to fall. The Bank of England, of course, don't agree with that. The Bank of England say that that's not going to be the case. They will continue to grow. And the areas that will continue to grow are probably areas like central London, like you said, Hammersmith and Fulham area, primarily because they have been slightly behind because the international buyer hasn't had the opportunity to get into the country for the last 18 months almost now properly. So certainly last 6 months when they stopped all the internal flying or external flying part of it. So, that will continue to feed, and of course it's an outward spiral from there because if the central London property prices start doing that, it will have a continuation. It won't take away, irrespective of what happens, the idea that people want to and are still looking to and have readjusted their lives to move out of the bigger cities. That's something that is very, very, current, and I think it will continue to do so. So I can't see why that would be the case. But as Agam says, Rishi Sunak probably, at the time when they did it, thought it was good to motivate the property market. In hindsight, probably thinks he didn't need to do it. But from an agent point of view, and for obviously the job that I do for my clients, as far as I'm concerned, it's been excellent news for them all throughout the year, and people are still very keen to get on moving.
The market's actually showing, according to Yomdal this week, the current situation is that new vendor inquiries have been pretty flat, but they're still 26% above what they would be at this time of the year. So they're still pretty good, but they've flattened, and buyer interest has dipped by 6%. So that's helping to redress the demand and supply situation. Landlords seem to have seen an improvement. They're bouncing back 8% at the end of this week. 7% still below the average. But traffic to websites is still very high, 31% higher than they'd expect. So there's still a lot of interest in the market at the moment, despite the fact that the first part of the holiday tapers off at the end of this month. So it looks like things are steady, and Joe, it looks like we're going to be in the situation for a little while longer.
Yeah, because I think, don't forget, we are also coming to a seasonal scenario here as well. And normally, the world starts to plan to go away. June, come July, when the kids break up, July, August is traditionally a very, very quiet period. So in terms of that timing, some of those numbers will find its own correction as opposed to a dip down. It won't be a price reduction, it'll be a correction. Because obviously the areas that have been popular, those prices have been shooting up and they'll probably just level off a little bit. And some other areas will get better. So traditionally this time of the year, it will tend to slow down. But because staycation seems to be on the agenda, I'm not expecting a lot of people to calm down. I'm not expecting them to still be interested in making those moves and those thought process. I think they're going to consolidate 21 as a year of consolidation and plan, and then head out to 22 with a new vigor, with a new challenge in there, and a bit of a spring in their step to say, right, we've gone through this, we've done this, we've made these changes, and so how do we progress next? So that's where I see that. I think they've still got plenty of fuel in the system for the housing market.
We're talking shortly, Agam, about investments and returns on investment. And if you just look at some of the data on the screen there now, the average price of a home increased 8.9% in the year to April. And if you were in Wales, 15.6% increase. And as I mentioned earlier on, up in the northeast in Sunderland, 16.9%. and even in London, properties up 3.3%. So it's not surprising so many people are getting interested in property when the comparison to investing in a normal financial instrument is just doesn't bear thinking about.
No, that's right. And my view on the prices, I think, like Joe said, there will be a period of consolidation maybe for a few months later this year. But then the trend is still upwards, and I don't see any sort of slump in property prices. Maybe they'll be steady later on this year and then back up on the rise again next year, simply because the underlying demand is still there. Okay, it's so any correction that there is will be very temporary.
And I guess one of the things we're coming on to talk about co-funding shortly. I mean, one of the problems that Joe's always highlighted about investing in property, you think, well, okay, I'm going to get such good growth if I buy a second property or an investment property. But of course, particularly if you're a retired person with funds at your disposal, the trouble with that is that you've got to get involved in running that property. You've got the business end of it to deal with, as Joe says, the leaky tap, etc., etc. Whereas with a co-funding opportunity, you can pretty much be hands off if you wish to be.
Exactly. Yes. The other thing about it is, a lot of people buy property thinking that they'll rent it out. I would just refer to all the experiences people are having when they're not collecting the rent, and they haven't been able to evict the tenants either. So it's not always a rosy picture that you buy a property, you rent it out, you earn more on it than the mortgage that you're paying, and hey ho, you're making a profit. A lot of the times you'll have tenants that are not paying, and there's very little you can do about it.
Well, let's just move on to that because we do have a story about this, funny enough. Rishi Sunak has made landlords the scapegoats for a crisis of his own making. According to Nala, who we know well, Nala are saying that the Chancellor is, the majority of landlords in a new survey, 60%, feel that their lettings business will be negatively affected as a result of the pandemic, with 34% saying that their rental income has been impacted by the events of the past year. Despite more than 90% of landlords surveyed being individuals and almost half renting just one or two properties, among those who had offered at least one tenant a rent-free period or had allowed rent to be deferred, and 58% had absorbed losses from their savings. So it's been a pretty tough year for landlords, but do we have any sympathy for them, Joe?
So there's a little bit of sympathy for them, Paul, in the sense that it's been a tough year. There's no doubt about it, and we've covered this subject a few times by saying that the tenants have taken full advantage of the window of opportunity that they've been given by the government and by the structure that is placed. So basically, originally, when somebody was renting, they were given a 2 months notice to vacate if they weren't paying their rent or they had other problems. That was increased as a notice of 6 months by the government during the pandemic, and there was a perfectly good reason for that. And obviously, they didn't want lots and lots of people left homeless and have to deal with another crisis on top of the major crisis that they were already dealing with. But in that journey, the landlord has definitely suffered a huge amount. People haven't been paying their rent. They have had to dip into their own savings and deal with it. They'll have a mortgage or a buy-to-let program, or in some cases maybe a bridge finance as well, that they've just had to make, to pay, because they're the ones that will actually ultimately suffer. So the tenant has probably taken full advantage of that legal situation. But that dream was over as of the 1st of June, as you know, because now, if they haven't made up that rent, they are under strict situations where they are going to have the bailiffs knocking on the door and eviction notices served on them. And so even though that time has come from 6 months to 4 months, by October it will go back to 2 months. But yes, they have suffered. Where possible. Part of that is a two-way story, Paul, because sometimes landlords also become a bit stubborn and say, I don't want to do it this way. But I've always tried to advise that if you can get a communication with the tenant, offer them that if they're struggling, work with them, have maybe half of the money now, half money later on, they do it. But sometimes, the personalities are such that they just go, no, I'm not going to pay it. What are you going to do about it? And there comes the problem. And so that is a massive backlog. But I know the courts are very busy, and I'm sure the bailiffs are very busy out there serving their notices.
Agam, you can perhaps sympathise with some of the tenants. Say, well, at least the landlords have got some savings to fall back on when they've been furloughed or in difficult times due to the pandemic. They've probably run out of savings or never had any in the first place. So it's difficult from their side, I guess, to have any sympathy with the landlord.
I suppose without having real data, I don't know if we can say that the landlords will have savings, and we can't say that the tenants don't have any savings. As far as I know, a lot of the tenants might be in jobs where they've had 80% of their salary being covered by the taxpayer. So I think there's a mixed picture out there. I wouldn't say I'd shed tears for landlords, but I think they have a right for a bit of sympathy. Yeah.
Indeed. What's interesting, one of the things that Nala has said about this is that the government have frozen the amount of housing benefit that comes as part of the universal credit. So 55% of rented households that use universal credit had a gap of around £100. So in other words, the universal credit housing element is about £100 short every month of what the actual rents are. And one of the criticisms of Rishi Sunak is that he actually froze that benefit this year, knowing full well that rents were rising. So that does seem a little mean, Joe.
No, not at all, really. I think that, if it's £100 and if they spoke to their landlord in a way and explained what their situation is, the landlord would actually adjust that to another time. Nobody wants not to, but the point is not to pay it at all and say, I'm not getting enough. That's where the problem arises. But from Rishi Sunak's point of view, you can beat him up or you can beat the government as much as you like, but the reality is, they were thrown a curveball, and I think they did all right in the fact that at least everybody's in their place and deal with it. But the data and the marketing, and of course any media, will always pick on the negatives rather than the positives. And the positives, in my mind, is that we got through, or getting through it, or pretty much got through it. Whereas the easiest thing to say is that this wasn't right, but I think that if the tenants and the landlords had a conversation, they would have worked something out. And if the figures are stated to be about £100 short in terms of benefits, that there have been many other benefits, as Agam has just said, 80% of the salary being paid by the government under furlough schemes. It still meant that there was a lot of people that were there. You'd be surprised how many people were sitting at home and still doing other perhaps jobs and things where they could make some money, but there wasn't a huge amount of hardship. There is a sector that will suffer, and I understand that. Obviously, when there's losses in the family and people you lose, loved ones you lose, and so forth, there's always going to be other points that come in. But in general, my view is that I think we've coming out of it as best as we can.
They say that that there should be a new hardship loan scheme to help tenants pay off the rent arrears, which would cost less than the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, but would provide landlords and tenants with the financial support they need to keep them in their homes and prevent damage to credit scores. So, on the face of it, if it's going to cost less than the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, it doesn't seem like it's too difficult to do, I would have thought. Agam?
I'm sort of wary of any further sort of things for the taxpayer to fund. I'd rather what Joe suggested is the tenant and the landlord have a sensible conversation, and when things are back to normal, they can make up the shortfall, rather than dump it on the taxpayer again.
Had a comment in from somebody on Facebook. Unless, of course, if the property is rented out to a housing association where rents are guaranteed, is that a more secure way to rent?
Yes, but potentially the housing association is partly funded by the government. So in a adverse kind of way, you are getting a guaranteed rent. But of course, um, maybe not with the market rent, because again, housing associations don't always pay what is a market rent. So it's always a question of where you want it to be. You want to be a market rent and have the risk, or you want the guaranteed rent and just be sure that you're going to get an XYZ amount to cover your loan or your facilities that you've got, and have that sort of sleepless night, and say that, I'm getting my money guaranteed every month without fail. There's a lot of guaranteed schemes out there. There's a lot of private landlord, private tenants, and private agents that do provide guaranteed schemes, but normally not at the market rent.
Final story today, and this is very interesting, and I guess it's a situation that we would expect in a market where we are at the moment. Basically, a particular estate agent. Well, we all know as agents, there's nothing worse than the tire kickers and the time wasters. Isn't that true, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely.
Those with no intention of buying, or unable to buy, of course, or unable to commit to anything. So one estate agent in Ireland has decided to avoid the tire kickers and the time wasters. And controversially, they've asked for proof that they have the funding before they're allowed to view their new homes on a development in Dublin. So they must provide full proof of funds before they can see any of the houses. That means in order to secure an appointment for viewing, applicants are required to fill out a questionnaire, provide evidence of their mortgage approval, or a help to buy grant, or personal savings, or even cash gifts from family. And this has caused a furore. Just wondered what your thoughts are. Professionally, Joe, give us your thoughts.
My thoughts are very clear on this, Paul. At the end of the day, every process requires a certain way to deal with things. And if there is a demand and there are people that are keen, as an auctioneer, we are often probably criticized in the same way, but we know that you've got to have the funds available to bid or make an offer and then be stuck with it, and instantly exchange contracts. So to a large extent, it's kind of a welcome thing as far as I'm concerned, because you do get. However, there is a sector of the market, as we call it, the tire kickers, that unfortunately or fortunately take their time to look at it, and rightly so. And with that in mind, they will go out and look at everything, dissect it, make sure it's exactly what they want, but feel that they don't want to have to show their cards in terms of how much money they've got, or whether they have the sufficient funds to do it. Part of that is that most people are going to mortgage. They're going to get some sort of loan somewhere. And what they tend to do is not actually tell you that until it's the last minute. And through private treaty sales, that is always left to the last minute. And 9 times out of 10, it falls at that point because they've been hoping in the journey. So let's take the journey in hand. You go and make an offer on a property, and in this case, they're buying this new development. They've got all these people that are interested. They're going to make a choice of the ones that actually have the funds to do it, or the ability to get the loan. Their credit is good. They've checked their finances out, and they know that they can do it. So that's why they will probably, because of the demand. If the same situation was slightly reversed and said there was hardly anybody there to look at it, they'll probably allow everybody to go and see it, just with the hope and a prayer that one of them somewhere along the line finds the money to do the deal. But in a situation where something is popular, then I think it's only fair to ask for that, and that makes you decide. And of course, the unfairness of that is somebody says, well, actually, how do you know I don't have the money? Well, if you do have the money and you do have the wish and the want, then show it. And if not, you have to just move on from it. So I think, it's definitely a major step in the right way. Why? Because, sellers also have a lot of time wasters. Sellers will, go through making a plan and thinking, I'm going to be moving in maybe month 1, 2, or 3. And then 6 months later, they're still faffing around because the buyers have not actually told the truth. And the person that actually gets clobbered for it, guess who? It's the estate agent. Our estate agent didn't do this and he didn't do that, and therefore because of this we can't do this. So forever the man in the middle, you're going to get clobbered one way or another. So whether you ask the money up front and say it, you're going to be a bad guy, and if you didn't do it, you're still going to be a bad guy. So what can you do?
They've obviously got a very good PR team because they're claiming that it's so that they can stay within COVID guidelines. But to be fair to them, they had 5,000 people want to view 44 homes. So they're saying that they obviously can't facilitate all of those. So they're claiming the COVID card, if you want, on that one. But interestingly, Ireland's housing minister has said he's simply not impressed. He'll be contacting all the industry bodies about the product, the process. Asking for this level of detail is simply wrong. Do you think there's an ethical part of this, Agam?
No, not really. I think this is a matter of supply and demand. If you've got 5,000 people wanting to look at 44 properties, how else can you filter it? And the sensible thing in a commercial environment is to segregate those that are serious and able to purchase from all the window shoppers. The window shoppers can look at everything online. They're not automatically entitled to have an assisted viewing. And if these are the circumstances, I think this is perfectly fair.
Mm.
There's nothing unethical about it. Yeah.
It's an interesting subject, and we'll see how that one develops for sure over time. We did mention earlier on, Agam, that we were delighted to have you here, and we wanted to talk co-funding. And I did say at the beginning, as we opened up today, that it's a subject that both, I think it's probably fair to say, both Joe and I don't know a great deal about it. I've done some research online, as you'd hope I would. There's co-funding and there's crowdfunding. So what's the difference between the two?
Okay, so look, these terms are still sort of trying to find final definitions. But the way I would describe crowdfunding is that supposing you want to go and invest in a property purchase, for example, several of you would gather up together, maybe using a crowdfunding platform, and join up all the pennies until you've got enough to do the deal. And you'd use some sort of online platform where you'd advertise the property, how much you need to do. You'd have a little chart showing you, how much is left to fund. And when you've got it all together, you'd go and do a deal. Okay, the co-funding that I'm talking about is slightly different. So we, as a bridging lender, for example, would already have gone and done a deal where we would have lent some developer or somebody that's bought a property that they want to convert, or even bought a property at auction that they want to refurbish. And let's just to keep the figure simple. So we could have lent somebody £1 million against a property worth, say, 1.5 million. Okay, so what we would do is that we'd put that on our website as a list of properties that you can invest in. So you could then have a property investor that would like to invest, and he could say, well, I've got £400,000 that I'm earning 0.1% in the building society, but I'm very risk averse. I don't want to just do it because I know you or whatever. I'd like to have some security over it so that I'm not dependent on you. Okay, so what we say is, all right, you come in, you co-fund the deal by 400,000. So that means Vector and the co-funder then are in 60 to 40 ratio. And what we do is to give security, and this is what's different, is that we put the legal charge and all the guarantees, the legal title of the property, into a trust. Okay, and the beneficiaries of that trust will be then the co-funder along with Vector in a 60-40 ratio. So that has a lot of benefits. It means that the funder has got the share of the first charge. Okay, so if anything does ever go wrong, okay, and we have to step in and try and dispose of the property, maybe pass it to Joe for putting on an auction, the proceeds of those funds will go into the trust. Okay, and the beneficiary has the same control as we have, and he'll get his 40% of the receipts, and we'll get 60%. So it just gives shared security and a lot more confidence than going and doing something without that security.
So is this purely for property development, Agam, or can I, for example, invest in a property that's already there that, for example, is being rented out?
No, you can do all types of scenarios. So when we provide mortgages, we provide mortgages for people that are doing buy-to-let, for example. Okay, so the property exists, there's already a rental stream coming into it. Then there'll be other properties that a lot of the high street funders don't like doing, which is maybe a shop downstairs with 2 flats upstairs. Okay, so there's also a rental income coming in those properties. And then you have the other end, which is maybe somebody's bought land with planning permission. We do a very low loan to value on it, so the security level is fairly high, but there's no rent on it at the moment. Okay, and then the other example is where people have bought land and they want to do a development on it. Okay, now what happens is that there's a risk and reward situation there. So on the buy-to-let property, the loan rates will be much lower than they will be on somebody that's doing a development. And so the co-funder can choose from our list of deals that we've done what his appetite is. So the interest that he might get, for example, I'm just talking to give an example, is say he might only get 4% if it's a buy-to-let property, for example, whereas if it's a development property, he might get 7 or 8%. You see, so it's a level of comfort and the level of risk that the investor is prepared to take. But one of the big advantages is that we've done all the work. So we've done the due diligence. We've, we are the ones that have found the deal, and we're managing it through beginning till redemption. So we're doing everything. So the investor can just lie back as basically a silent investor, but with full security. So as we were discussing earlier, with the investor doesn't really have to get involved in maintenance of the property, or when there's a tap leaking, he doesn't have to worry about that. He doesn't need to get involved in any of that. Everything is taken care of because we're, as the Vector, we're managing all of that process.
It does rather seem one of those kind of too good to be true, but how safe is the structure, and how am I as a co-funder, how am I protected?
Okay, so the first level of security obviously is that whoever you co-fund a deal with, you want to see their credentials. And it's not for me to sort of, the borrower should do his own homework. And as a public company, all our accounts and all our sort of track record is all up on the internet. We're quoted on the London Stock Exchange, so full disclosure and scrutiny is on us all the time. So the co-funder can first of all do his homework and see who the person that he's going to be co-funding or the entity that he's co-funding with is. Once he's done that research, then I suppose the next thing is he chooses the type of deals that he likes. Does he want safe buy-to-lets, or is he prepared to be a bit more adventurous and go for maybe a development? Okay, although it's a higher return, you could say it's slightly more risky. Thirdly, then you're going to be getting a share of the first charge on the transaction, and that really is the fundamental security. The other thing about the trust structure to note is that a trust structure means that in the worst case scenario, for example, say your Vector, for example, went into administration, that trust is outside the remit of the assets of Vector, and so those funds are protected again. So really, you have all the legal protection that you can possibly have in this structure. Now, the risks that are there, for example, we try to do loans with around 70% LTV. So say, let me just go back to another example. So there's a property worth £1 million. We've lent £700,000 on it. A co-funder has come in at 300. We asked then Joe to auction it because the borrower is in default. We'd have to have a property price fall of 30%, and achieve a price less than 700,000 before we get into a situation that anybody's going to be looking at a loss. Okay, and then again, that loss will be in the same proportion. So if we sold the property at 600, then there'd be a loss of 100,000. That is probably the worst possible case scenario you can think of, and then there would be a little capital loss. Okay, but these are the things that the co-funder can assess, and he can forecast what trends he thinks there are in the market in terms of pricing, of house prices going up or down. And if he thinks there's going to be something more than that, well, we ourselves wouldn't be lending. We thought property prices were going to fall more than 30% in a year. But that's the level of safety that we have.
Mm. I'm interested to know about the level of commitment in terms of time one would have to do. So if I'm putting that 300,000 or 400,000 in, presumably the time that my money is tied up is dependent on the project. But that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is then, if suddenly I need to get my hands on my 300,000, I'm assuming that it's going to be quite difficult for me to do that as I'm involved in this particular contract.
Okay, look, so the term is always going to be aligned to what our borrower is, okay? So usually we would lend to somebody with a 12-month term, okay? And once we've done the deal, we'll put it up on the website, okay? So it may be that you'll come in on it a month after we've already done the deal. So that means after 11 months, the loan is up for redemption, okay? Now, what we often do is if our borrower wishes to extend, we might give him another 6 months or another year, okay? And then the co-funder's term is also extended. But it also happens that because a lot of our deals are bridging, that the borrower may be able to refinance elsewhere, and he might do that sort of 6 months afterwards, in which case the co-funder will also get his money early, okay? So really, there is a dependency on what happens with the borrower. It may get extended, or it may be paid earlier than you expected, because it's not a fixed term loan, so it's got those parameters. Now, the other part of the question is, if, for example, you need the money in a hurry and you want to get it back. Now, we're big enough as a company that what we'd probably say is, all right, look, we'll just buy you back, okay? What we would do then is just say, well, whatever interest you've earned, you're going to have to forfeit that, okay? But you can have your capital back early. That's the sort of scenario that we would offer.
And what sort of fees?
So it'd be basically loss of interest. Yeah.
Well, that seems fair. What sort of fees are charged with this kind of arrangement, Agam?
Okay. Now, bearing in mind that we're the ones that are finding the customer, we're the ones that are doing all the legal work, due diligence on it, we're the ones that are managing the entire journey of the loan. So what we do is we try and keep it simple. So, for example, if we're managing to achieve, say, 9% from our borrower, we would take a margin on the percentage rate and maybe give you, say, 7% for argument's sake. And that headline margin is what is to compensate us, in effect, the fees for handling the transaction.
And one last question on this, and Joe, I invite you in to join us in just a second. Apologies, but just one last question about how is this all regulated, Agam?
Okay, the regulations are on this. So we've had some big firms of lawyers sort of draw up all the documents for us. Okay, and this isn't the sort of thing that we'd expect people to do, unless they're sophisticated or high net worth individuals. Yeah, so there's that level. Although the legal rules don't actually require that, but that's the gatekeeping that we ourselves do. So we'd expect that anybody that wants to come in something like this would either take legal advice before doing it, okay, or they consider themselves to be a sophisticated investor. That means they have their own house and they're doing this with funds that are additional to their savings to participate in the transaction like this. And then we're setting up a trust structure. And what would normally happen is that the investor would use his own solicitors to work with our solicitors to get the deal done. Okay, so there's full legal advice and transparency throughout. So that there isn't regulations as such, but we make it sort of that it goes through a proper legal due diligence process for the investor as well.
It's an interesting concept, isn't it, Joe? What's your thoughts?
Well, I think it's a very exciting concept, Paul. I've one of the reasons I felt that it was a good opportunity for us to actually hear the whole concept from Agam is because throughout the journey of property, there comes a level of persons who do not wish to get involved in what I call the leaky tap part of the job. And an opportunity like this, especially where they've got pretty much 99.9% of security, especially when they are part of the trust and they're part of the actual title deeds, where they are having a share of the ownership and providing the security, is, I think, is a great vehicle, a great opportunity for people that have anything from, I suppose, 50,000-60,000 pounds sitting in their bank, which is earning them 0.1%, and they have a scope to earn, maybe, as Agam says, anything from maybe 4 to 7%, depending on what they choose to invest in. And I think it's a great opportunity. I really felt that was the key in my mind, because there are a lot of people in the property side of things where some years back they allowed pensions to be drawn down earlier, and so every pensioner that did draw their pensions earlier decided that they'll come into the property market and buy a flat or something and rent it out somewhere. But really, they could have probably been enjoying themselves on a nice cruise somewhere. But now they felt compelled to be around to make sure that the tenant paid the rent, and if there's anything that's wrong with it, somebody else was here to deal with it. And there's a huge number of people who actually don't really want to do that at that point of their life. So I think something like this could be very attractive to them, where they think, well, actually, I'm still getting a better return on my investment with security. And I think that's how I see it. And it's I think a great opportunity, and it's a good scheme to sort of throw out there. And if anybody wants to raise any questions or anyone's not sure about it, well, give us a call, and I'll be happy to sort of put you in front of Agam and put the lawyers together and give you that chance to sort of invest. And it's a good alternative to buying a property. Not that I'm saying that you shouldn't buy a property, and I'm not trying to sell myself short for not doing that, but I just think that there's a level of investor that just doesn't want to be there. I speak to them all the time, where they say, what else am I supposed to do? I'll go and buy a flat, and then they buy something that has probably got a low lease on it, and they realise that because they've had the cash, they think they've bought themselves a bargain, and sometimes they haven't really sort of bought themselves a bargain. They probably bought themselves, a bag of troubles. So I think it's a great opportunity. I want to say, thanks for coming on board today, Agam, and hopefully there'll be some people out there that think that's a good scheme, and you've explained it, in my mind, about as clearly as you can. It's a simple, as Paul said, sounds too good to be true, but I suppose the proof of the pudding is in the eating, isn't it, really? So we'll have to sort of trial run it and see how that goes.
We just had a comment in, said bridging is not an FCA regulated activity unless, of course, it's owner occupied scenario. So we were talking here about regulation. So from the bridging perspective, that's not regulated. There was one question that just came to mind as we were talking, Agam. Obviously, setting up trust and dealing with the solicitors, the legal side of things. One can imagine there's quite a bit of additional cost that I would have to commit to setting up these structures. I mean, do you cover those costs within that agreement, or is that on top for me to have to consider?
Right. For the borrower, there will be negligible additional costs, because what happens is we've got a city firm that will set the trust up, and we will do all that at our cost. Okay. Now, we want the investor the first time round to be represented by solicitors, and the role of the solicitor really would be is just to check over the documents, and the solicitor that will be checking over the documents will then have a sort of comfort from our solicitors that have done all the work and set it all up. So he's not being asked to do any other work, and the only reason we ask for the co-funder to use a solicitor the first time is just to give him some sort of comfort that everything's been done properly and is giving him the security that we're saying he's getting. But maybe when he comes in on the second transaction, he'll have enough confidence not to do that, because it'll be the same sort of document set with just a different address and different figures on it. And so in my sort of view, the solicitor representing the co-founder shouldn't really be charging for more than an hour's work. I think £300 to £400 is the level of legal fees that he should allow for doing it the first time. And when he's got the comfort, then the next time he can just rely on our firm, who are a big city firm, so that they can have sort of confidence in what they do.
And is this a relatively new concept, or has it been around a while?
It's not a new concept. And a lot of lending is done this way, where you'll have and in the past, I suppose the word you would have used is syndicated lending, where 3 or 4 lenders get together, they do a deal, and then the legal charge is in the name of all of those people. Yeah. So where this is different from syndicated is that Vector have already gone and done the deal, okay, to make it easier, okay, and then you can have 1 or 2 or 3, as many co-funders as want to come in on a particular deal, and we'll just add them to the trust, so they become beneficiaries to the trust. So we've simplified the structure, made it easier, and we're using the trust method rather than having everybody being tied to have their name on the legal charge. So it's the actual legal charge that goes into the trust. Okay, so it's an easier to understand concept, and it gives you a bit of flexibility, because like you said, if you want to leave early, all that happens is if we give you your money back, then we just take your name off the trust.
Okay.
As a beneficiary, so your name's deleted. And or you could have got a friend who wants to come in instead, so he could take over and swap around. It just offers a lot more flexibility.
We have had somebody put in the comments that they would wish you to contact them. I'm not going to put the number on the screen for obvious reasons, but I will give you the number after we've finished our program today. So there is somebody watching who's interested in talking to you already, but we'll keep that off the screen for obvious reasons. Okay, thank you, Agam. That's really good. We've got one last thing before we wrap up today. We try and keep within the hour for the benefit of everybody's sanity, including my own. We do have a property of the week, Joe, which I'm sure will be of interest to many. This is a new instruction for Town and Country, so do your best job.
Yeah. So this year has been a year of change of life and plan in people's minds. And I was at this property in Bletchingley, just sort of near Red Hill, Reigate, that sort of area. So not far from the city lives, but at the same time accessible. And the ultimate dream for a lot of people is to have the space, the land, and the garden space and the growth area. And here we have a lovely little, you could call it a sort of a small holding if you want. It's got the opportunity for grazing, a nice cottage. It's got planning permission to extend it, to provide more sort of first floor accommodation. It is a semi-detached property, and I think the main thing is that it's in a superb location. It's got a lovely cottagey country feel about it. And by the way, the internet speed, I'm told, is pretty good there. So as you know, it's a big thing nowadays. Working from home, the internet speed is definitely good. The country feel was lovely. The drive was very nice there. And it's in our auction for the 13th of July. And it's actually already generated a lot of interest. So those people that are looking to exit the city life into a nice country life, this is a great opportunity. Good guide price is £600,000, 4 bedrooms, couple of acres, I think it's about 3 acres in all, a couple of paddocks. Details are on our site. And a lovely country home to move to. But lots of parking, and of course, as you can see in that corner there. Thanks for that, Paul. And look at the aerial view. It's a lot for the money. When you look around and think that in the city, sometimes you're looking at £500,000 for a 1-bedroom flat. My guide at 600,000 gives you the country life, and it's not far to travel by train or motorway. I know that because I did the journey. The motorway is only about 10 minutes away. It's the M25. The only problem with the M25 is that you might actually stay there a bit longer than the 10 minutes. You're getting there is easy, but of course, as you know, it's the largest car park in the world. Sometimes you just got to make sure that you time it right. But yeah, great property. Give us a call. Come and have a look at it. And if you need any bridging to do that, we have Vector Capital with us today. I got a little punch there for you. We can even arrange the funding if that is required. And if anybody wants to make an investment, we can actually even offer the event. Look, we are a one-stop shop here, mate.
Well, we've certainly talked about the race for space, and I think, to be honest with you, with the amount of land available there, you'd win the race for space.
Loads of space.
Lovely. That just about wraps it up for this week. Agam, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure to have you on and to talk about co-founding. I feel I've learned quite a lot this morning, certainly about something I knew nothing about until a few days ago. So thank you for that, and thank you for the benefit of that knowledge. Joe, thank you as always for your wisdom, and another wonderful property there that we managed to see. So thank you so much indeed. Thank you to everyone watching. And if you want to get in contact with Agam, perhaps, Agam, you can give us some contact details that you can just give us to finish up with today.
Agam's contact details. We can go
sorry.
Yeah.
Well, Joe, if they just contact the channel, and then you can forward it. That'd be the easiest, isn't it?
Okay, all right. Well, get in touch with us. propertymatterstv@gmail.com is our email address. Or, of course, you can ask us to contact you in the comments below. Wherever you're watching us today, that'll come up for us here. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Again, we're back with another Property Matters next Sunday. And, of course, we're pleasured to announce that Tony Patty will be joining us, Joe. The legendary Tony Patty.
So next week we have the legendary Tony Patty. He is the, I think, pioneer in his own time of being probably one of the first most legendary DJs, presenters, and so forth. And I've been dealing with Tony recently. He's going through the process of house moving himself, and we've had lots of discussions about that process. And I thought I'll invite him along and get him to share his current experiences and how he's getting on with that side. But more than anything else, is a great character, lots to say, and he'd probably want to spin a few tunes, but it's not the place, Tony. No spin on tunes.
Well, we had a checkup on his camera this week using our software that we do the show with, and when he logged in as Turban Tone.
There you go.
That says it all, really. And on that bombshell, gentlemen, thank you so much once again, and we'll see you next week at 10 o'clock for another Property Matters.